often consumed with quality doesn't work. Actually, I think one of the biggest challenges that media have is there isn't enough quality journalism. There is a dumbing down on mainstream media, trying to create what they think is shareable content, when in reality that works for certain platforms, but when it comes to professional journalism and professional news organizations, quality still does work, and people are actually willing to pay for quality. There are lots of media organizations actually as businesses are very successful, and the main reason is that they are providing quality content to a market that is willing to pay for that quality content. The fourth and penultimate point, I think social has created a level playing field, and by that I don't mean that everyone is influential or important on that playing field. What I mean is that the key stakeholders that make a news story, the organizations, the institutions, individuals, etc., the relationship between those individuals and groups has been flattened out. There is less of a need to go through intermediaries. Lots of that conversation, lots of that sharing and that flow of information happens in a networked manner on a flat platform. The hierarchy between those groups has been flattened. And finally, I think, to summarize, the biggest shift is a shift in principles. It is elements like verifying sources, verification of news, all of these things are still present and still exist within digital and technology. The biggest shift is that they need to be done differently, and that requires a different skill set, a different way in terms of news is organized, and a different way in which teams are organized. And each of these trends has very practical implications in terms of how we distribute news, in terms of business models, in terms of how PR is done, etc. But fundamentally, I think at the heart of it is a shift in how technology has changed our behavior as news consumers and the dynamics and implications that come with that.
Thank you, Alberto. You can tell you don't have to speak in 140 characters or less, don't you? I did ask for 2 minutes. We'll move on now to Jack, who is at the sharp end, I think, of the digital revolution in terms of news. Jack Riley is Head of Digital Audience and Content Development for the Independent and Evening Standard, which I used to belong to that parish as well. And his recent projects include Independent Voices, the relaunch, the excellent relaunch standard.co.uk site, and the Independent's partnership with Facebook and its Open Graph Facebook app. And I said all those words for each one as well, connected to the last one, didn't I? But I'll hand over to Jack.
Thanks. Thank you, Jimmy. Well, I think Alberto gave a pretty good summary actually of the situation. I think that the big challenge, kind of the major challenge that's facing all media organisations, whether they're newspapers or broadcast or whatever they were traditionally be categorised as, is basically what I would describe as the atomisation of news. That's the reduction of news to its most kind of concise and small unit, and the corresponding reduction in terms of the attention that your audience get into that segment. And the social is just a part of that. And it's quite easy in these in discussions around digital to focus on social because it's platform self-expression and everything else. But actually, when we look at the consumption patterns of news that we see, certainly for newspapers and for the broader news ecosystem, is also a situation where people will they'll start at Google, or they'll start at Facebook or Twitter. They'll begin somewhere that's kind of the theft of the front page from the newspaper. People will start somewhere else, and they'll start either with a question or with the second and a half that they're happy to spend on a tweet. They'll make a value judgment of whether they're going to go in to read that content, and if they are, they'll go in, they might read it, and they might come right out. What we're seeing now is compared to when I started working in the Independent 5 years ago, the big change in consumption, besides mobile, which is something that you can't avoid talking about, is that change in the actual journey. So the journey doesn't start with the front page of the newspaper anymore. It starts somewhere else on someone else's property. And for news organisations to thrive in that situation, they have to understand how those users are finding, what that experience is like, and they have to work with those companies, because if those companies are the gatekeepers to your content and to the general news experience on the internet, that's a sort of tremendous responsibility they've got. It's a commercial responsibility, it's an editorial responsibility, it's an ethical responsibility, and it's the responsibility of the news organisations to work with companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter in the way that we have and other news organisations do, to make sure that they understand what consumers want and what news organisations want, because I think often reducing editorial judgments to an algorithm in the way that products like Google News do doesn't always kind of create the best news, and it doesn't do, to Alberto's point about the kind of dumbing down of news and maybe the death of quality journalism, a lot of the ways that content is aggregated, particularly algorithmically rather than socially, actually does a disservice to quality journalism. So I think it's important that we recognise now that we're part of a broader ecosystem, and we look at all the parties involved in that ecosystem to try and work out how news consumption is going to work from now kind of going forward. There you go. And so that's that's just kind of my opening thoughts. I don't want to run on this too much.
Interrupted by one of your own as well. We'll move on to John Pelling. John is, again from a different take on it, John is currently press counsel at the Swedish Embassy, which makes him a primary consumer. But also working in digital media within government, he is also a producer, one of the new producers, because governments weren't traditionally producing content, but now they are. Before that, he was a London-based journalist for the Morning Daily, which his name I won't even bother attempting. He can tell you what it is. And has studied journalism and multimedia, and has worked in online and radio journalism, but has mainly worked in print. John.
Yeah, it's been really interesting for me to start working for government this summer, coming from journalism. I think that from our side, we have a lot of work to do to keep up with developments at the moment, and I think it's very inspiring to follow the private sector, in particular the media, who I think is very innovative, although there are still a lot of questions surrounding finance, but particularly in the way and how media is renegotiating the contract with the public and allowing for scrutiny. And I think this is something that we in government will have to get used to and we should embrace. I think there are many interesting attempts from governments all over the world at the moment to adapt to the quickly moving events in the world. It could be the FCO here in the UK or our own foreign minister in Sweden, Carl Bildt, who took to Twitter during the Arab Spring, because he was then upset with the coverage in traditional news media. So all these things are very... we have a lot to learn from media as an institution. Being government, media has learned to be more transparent, and we will have to learn to be much more transparent as well, which I think will make us much more relevant in the future. I also think that it's important to remember that this immense flow of, or this fast flow of information, which now forces us to use applications like Summly to summarize all the content to be able to even get a grasp of it, is based on the fact that we have the internet, and it's really important that we keep an eye on that to allow this free space to keep on functioning.
Thank you, John. And then move on to Milo. So you have some time to prepare your questions, but not much. Milo Yiannopoulos is a British journalist and entrepreneur. He's founder and editor-in-chief of The Kernel, which I believe is a year old today, isn't it? Tomorrow. A year old tomorrow. Sorry, I do it to disservice, not quite that mature yet. It's an online magazine focusing on European startup technology, where Milo himself writes on technology, media culture, startups, and the sexual transgressions of would-be media moguls.
Well, so talking as a newbie publisher, I'm a little bit disturbed by some of this because my view is slightly different. I mean, you can what sort of things that Alberto says, are true as far as they go. But I think the organisations, the sort of trendy newspapers, the ones that are hemorrhaging readers and hemorrhaging money, who follow these sorts of principles, aren't going to be around for very much longer. And actually, the news organisations that are making money, the ones that are going to define the future of media, are the ones who understand that social media is devaluing journalism. social media is actually, the approach that news organisations have taken to social media, the race for the bottom and these ever more shorter, crappier articles, is actually what's accelerating the problem in their industry. What I've done over the last year is try to talk to people at newspapers that actually are making money, publications that are making money, and the overriding feedback from all of them is that two things matter. One of them is a ruthless attention to detail and quality, and the other is that we absolutely do not abdicate responsibility for editorial decision-making to the crowd and to the mob. And that is precisely what's happening at most of the major newspapers. I mean, in a way, the good news is the ones that are doing that most enthusiastically are the ones that are leaping off cliffs commercially. So I'm a little worried about these things that are true as far as they go. They're true enough today, but really for me, I sort of, I don't mean to flatter myself with this remark, but I try to take a sort of Steve Jobsian view about this, which is that you actually consumers don't necessarily know what they want, and the purpose of newspapers has always been to, as Michael Gove would put it, present readers with the best that's been thought and written, and to prioritise what they need to know about today. And it's our job to do that in the awful buzzword that we have these days, curation. But the old word for curation is editing. And precisely the function of newspapers that is most valuable, editing, is being thrown away by newspapers in thrall to these illusions that people are losing their attention spans and that are requiring ever more streams of content. Actually, commercially speaking, it simply isn't true. And I worry a little bit when I hear people who should be at the sort of forefront of this new revolution kind of talking themselves and their colleagues off, as I say, off commercial cliffs. This is not the way that the editorial organisations that actually have some chance of sustainability in the future are running themselves. And the successful ones, the ones that have that ruthless attention to detail, focus on quality, uncompromising editorial agenda, and sort of strong oversight. We can look, for example, at The Economist, The Spectator, The Wall Street Journal. Perhaps there are several of them, but they all have those things in common, and they're all resisting this trend. And those are the publications that are going to be around, in 10, 20 years. As opposed to newspapers that are sort of losing millions a week, whose immediate futures are in jeopardy. So I mean, some of this is true in as far as it goes, but I think it's, with all due respect, really quite short-sighted.
I always like people when they say on a panel with all due respect, because they really don't mean it.
Is that the British?
That's one of the British things.
The British,
British meme today. Is The Spectator making money?
Well, I think one thing you can say about The Spectator, which is relatively unique, is that both its print and digital subscriptions are going up very healthily, which is unusual for any media organisation, particularly one as old as The Spectator. The magazine itself may not be profitable. I think the magazine is just about profitable. The website isn't. But it's one of those publications whose subscriptions, both on and offline, are going up quite healthily and quite consistently, which is not true of the newspaper that's most enthusiastically embracing this glorious social media revolution. We all know what happens when we abdicate responsibility to the mob. We've seen it when it takes control of the news agenda. It makes non-news into sort of flurries of chaotic, emotional, hysterical crisis. Nobody wants this. The readers don't want it. The readers certainly won't pay for it, and it doesn't do anybody any good. Least of all the future of the industry.
Far be it from me to point to the Daily Mail as an example where that kind of thing does have to pay by the way. But I think Alberto wants to come back to you.
I want to reply to Steve here.
Shouldn't you tweet?
No, I wanted to clarify a point, because I actually agree with Milo, but I think he misunderstood the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to make was that the majority of the news industry actually looks at the wrong bits of social. So they over-enthusiastically embrace technology and social for the sake of embracing it. And that works, for example, if you're BuzzFeed. So you can have that type of content and written in a certain way if you're that type of organisation and it's profitable. But if you're a quality newspaper, that doesn't work. And to give a practical example, when I say looking at the way people behave and consume media, there were lots of ridiculous articles when the Daily failed, all written by people who had never actually tried to build a news product, and all giving different reasons why the daily failed. And one of them was it's a daily publication. Actually, if you look at, for example, the Financial Times and its application, it works very well. Its subscriptions are going up as a quality publication that isn't constantly publishing news all the time, and it's looking at the way people behave, because the majority of people don't spend all day on Twitter, don't spend all day on Facebook, and if you look at consumption around the iPad, the majority of people actually, it spikes in the evening. They get home, lie down on the couch and read. So actually, if you have quality journalism targeted to the iPad in that way, it works. And the FT and The Economist are also good examples in terms of how they use social data for advertisement. So I actually agree with the point Milo was making, that the majority of people are looking at the wrong side of social. So just publishing on Facebook is not going to save journalism. And in fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, some big newspapers have actually removed their social reader from Facebook last week, because clearly, having millions of views just for the sake of having them does not work.
That was Guardian, wasn't it? Jack, do you want to
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's quite a sort of an interesting question actually about the way the Guardian handled their social media app. So the Independent was one of two UK news partners for Facebook when they launched the Open Graph in the end of September 2010, and there were kind of two very, very different approaches that were taken to that. One was the Guardian, who launched their application where you can read stories within Facebook, and the other one was the Independent, where we launched it, where you could read stories on the Independent's website, but share that back to Facebook if you wanted to, and you have to opt in. And that really was an interesting kind of commercial decision. I think probably a lot of what Milo has said was borne out there in terms of ceding a lot of control to that ecosystem too much, in fact. We certainly took the decision for commercial reasons that we put it to try and drive people back into the site. But I think the challenge with all the things that we're talking here is we're conflating all kinds of different media experiences actually, and we're conflating all kinds of different business models. At the moment, we're in a really interesting phase where there's really no consensus. Lots of the public, in the UK we've got more kind of more publishers than most other news ecosystems in the world, and really people are throwing everything at the wall and trying to see what sticks. And the challenge is to work in an industry where simultaneously you have the Daily Mail, which 2.4 billion page impressions a month, the largest newspaper site in the world, and making in a year about the same amount as a small Tesco's. And you have the and then you have the FTs, and you have the quality of publication. Yeah, they do make money, but if you can find the common thread between those two, I think you have to be pretty smart to find that. They're very, very different models, they're very different products, very different types of content. Actually, the types of digital first publications that we're talking about here, like BuzzFeed's or Huffington Post's or The Verge's or these sites that have been set up purely digital, I think they recognise this, and you can certainly see now, I think one of the big changes in the last year has been a consolidation of that early kind of aggregator rewrite approach that constituted the famed race at the bottom, again, as Ryan's reference, that constituted the augmentation of that with sort of a lot of poaching of mainstream journalists as well, a lot more long-form content. And really, there's no answer to this problem that isn't going to involve looking at users and looking at what users want to do. That use case that Alberto describes of waking up in the morning checking Twitter or Facebook, I think actually more people check Facebook, is going to be crucial for newspapers to maintain their position as an important part of the public conversation, and that role as the consciousness of the conscience of a country. That they won't get if they're not there, because that's where your users are. So I think it's a very mixed picture, and I don't think anybody has the right answer to it. But certainly I don't.
So, John, have you got the right answer?
Yeah, I got the right answer to this one. No, it's very interesting to what you say, that everyone is now trying to throw things at the wall and see what sticks as a consumer. And I think I lived through, that's my perception of how the news landscape is today. And you see a lot of replication, and it's all about how can you, who gets the attention in the short run. But I think that trust will be what will survive in this, and we're just in the middle of a big process which has many different challenges at the same time. I visited Associated Press recently, and they talked about how they verify their news when they source it from social media or user-generated content. And then it's still the old principles that used to be there, and I think those who don't apply those old strategies, but slightly faster, will have a struggle, will struggle in the future to actually survive when it comes to actually also create new models, economic models. And so it will be very interesting to see what's coming up in the next 2 years or 3 or 5 years, because it's so much has happened over the past few years that we are still clearly in the middle of this massive change.
Yeah, well, one point I want to make is if you want to make a small fortune, you take a large fortune, then enter the news business. So, in terms, if you're not going to make money out of news, then for you, Mark, what's motivated you to get into this business? And you can bring your own point after that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just to very quickly respond to the throwing everything against the wall thing. That's precisely the problem. And actually, one thing, I mean, it's easy to scoff, and the people who generally lead this debate often do. At the Daily Mail, at the Sun, those sorts of products. But frankly, I mean, thank God for Rupert Murdoch, because he's the only person doing really bold digital experimentation. I mean, with the Daily, no other news organisation in the world has taken such a focused, brave, expensive decision to experiment with a model like that. Nobody. Everybody else has, so, you know, as you say, thrown all this stuff against the wall in this timid, spineless way, all the while scoffing at everybody else. Rupert Murdoch's the only person who spent tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions, I don't know the numbers for the Daily, but certainly tens of millions, on a very bold, very focused experiment that didn't work, but everybody else learned. I mean, thank God for Murdoch. But, you know, to answer your question, you know, so you can't put a price on the power of being a publisher or editor of an influential sort of juggernaut media brand, whether in your vertical or a sort of mass market publication. And you know, nobody goes into the media to make money. Nobody ever has. Newspapers have never, you know, by and large, never made a fortune. So for me, it was a combination of things. I mean, on the one hand, I'm an ideologue about my subject, and you know, I want to impress my opinion on other people, and you know, sort of found myself to be largely unemployable at other publications. So I thought, right, well, I'll build the magazine that I always wanted to write for. You know, the sort of the masthead that I would be proud to be published under. So that's certainly 50% of the motivation for me. The other 50% is a realization that one thing that people can and do and will pay for is really insightful and funny, because the journalists that you love, that you remember, are the ones who make you laugh. You know, really funny, brilliant comment analysis. So that's what we focus on. We don't really break news. I mean, occasionally we'll break a story. We did a week or so ago about Luc Bozier, the sort of the MS, which I think you referred to in the introduction. You know, occasionally we'll break news when it comes to us, but what we focus on is really a really high quality stream, if you like, of comment and analysis, because we've taken the decision that you just can't make money out of news unless you're a very niche publication that's effectively providing a business intelligence service or a market research service, and we're not interested in that kind of reporting, frankly, because I find it dull. So we've been staying on for the analytical comment route because it's monetizable, and we are monetizing it. It's more interesting, and because we think that we thought that we could conduct a more bold, focused experiment with that, rather than as a new organisation, albeit without the legacy problems of a newspaper, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. That's you know, that is the one guaranteed way to lose a lot of money.
I think it's too big of a generalization to say you can't make money with news. I think the challenge is that too large parts of the media sector, too many parts of the media sector, are replicating news which people are they're basically fundamentally lots of the content is being produced, all saying the same thing. And there isn't enough value in why should I pay for something which I've read elsewhere for free? That is part of the question. There's no point in trying to get people to pay to get that information. Every single example, I think, of news which does make money, there is a very clear reason behind it. The Daily Mail on one end, the Financial Times on the other end. And it's not just commentary, it is also news. The Financial Times provides news on specific industries written in a way that you cannot find elsewhere. The Dow Jones charges $300,000 a year to provide its newswire service 60 seconds before it goes out to everyone else. That is news, and is making money from news. It is about finding the value in terms of news that is relevant enough for someone to pay. If it's reduced to, will someone pay for something I can read elsewhere for free? 90% of the content I generate you can find more or less elsewhere. Will you pay for that? Then of course the answer is no.
Right, that's probably enough arguing amongst ourselves. Now I want to argue with you. So has anybody got any questions from the audience? There's a microphone. There's a microphone. Thank you. So say your name and business, sir. Anyone answer your question?
I'm Phil McCauley. I'm the head of Culture, Media, Sports Policy for the Labour Finance Industry Group, which is affiliated to the Labour Party. I'd just like to ask you all about what you think the impact of the trends you've all spoken about is going to be on the next general election and how parties are going to use it.
John, politics, you can tell me.
UK politics. And that's a very good question. I think what we saw with the last elections, with the amount of tweets that were used during the party debates, that was an interesting sign of what is to come. And I guess that all the parties will have geared up their efforts for also looking towards, if you look to the United States, how social media is a big part of the campaigns already. So I think we will see much more of that, and it will be increasingly sophisticated, and also that a lot of more analysis going into seeing these feeds, how they are. I think one problem might be is that you don't reach some people through the traditional media, then if they don't read journalistic material, news material, not comment material, you might end up with citizens that are not properly informed. And that is a more wider democratic problem, I think, rather. So you can probably reach new groups with your own version of events, but how do you reach the wider society?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We can certainly look to, to the US elections as an example of where things are probably going. And if somebody from Biden subject isn't trying to replicate the kind of outreach tools and social tools that the Obama campaign brought to bear, particularly at the closing kind of stages of that election, I think they're crazy, because it's a really there's just a lot more access now for political parties to the type of people, to the people that they actually want to communicate with. They don't have to rely on things being filtered anymore. The role of communications and PR is changing completely in terms of that, and everybody's everybody's aware now that we're kind of in this we're in this situation where, because obviously of the atomization of the audience and the attention that they have that I described, you can reach people in multiple channels immediately, and you can reach almost everyone now. In terms of it's saturation of, we've almost reached saturation point in this country in terms of social media accounts. On Facebook, I think Twitter's further behind, but faster, and has the attention of the media that will then get your message in front of other people. So I think that's kind of I think that's what I would expect to see, is a lot more direct communication, and a lot more of the industry that is growing around content marketing. A part of that is just a recognition of the fact that the content, the internet now, in terms of the the role content can play within it has moved on a lot since the last election. You know, if you think of the big changes that Google have made in the past 4 years, the quality of the content that you're seeing if you're searching for things has gone up a lot as well. So there's a lot, you know, this burgeoning content marketing industry is a recognition of the fact that if you have good content now, you can get in front of people more easily perhaps than you could previously. So those are a few of the elements that I would.
I think one of the things to remember with the American campaign, it's more about customer relationship management than it is about news, and it's all about data, and then a bit more data on top of that, and that doesn't come cheap. So to Jack's point about whether the Labour Party, in your case, can mimic it, it's also whether the Labour Party can afford it. It's
Fortunately, you can afford it.
Oh, well, we shall see.
We shall.
I think it's impossible to say what it will be like in 2015 because it's, what, 2+ years away, correct?
Is that digital?
It's a long... It's impossible to say.
Say when it is.
But what will happen by the time the next election comes? Because if you rewind 2 and a bit years... No, exactly. If you rewind 2 and a bit years, even if you make a comparison with the US election, I think the big difference between this, the last US election and the previous one, the biggest difference actually is in terms of numbers. So the fact that many more people were on Facebook and on Twitter before, many less people asking, is Twitter useful or valuable? I remember when we launched Twitter, there wasn't one person we spoke to who said, what's the point of Twitter? Not many people ask that question now. So one thing I'm sure of is it will be mainstream even more in a few years' time. What that means in practice, I don't know. So one other thing I would like to add in the shorter term, which I think is an important trend politically, is if you take one of the biggest issues, probably, of our time politically, is a debate around Europe. And if you look at social, the part of the political debate which is pushing for a referendum and to leave Europe, mainly for lack of leadership on the other side, is winning the argument. And not necessarily in terms of issues, but if you look at the types of questions which are being asked, and the framing of that debate on social, and the issues which are being debated, that framing of the debate is being won on social and in mainstream media by one side of the argument. And I think that will be a very big trend in terms of social, especially if there is no other side of the argument of the debate. But there's a big speech coming in mid-January, I'm told.
For me, this is super simple. You know, we've seen it in the American election, we saw it in our last one, we're definitely going to see it in the next one, and it's about how much damage can be inflicted on your opponents. The grubby, unedifying, awful details that leak out, spread virally over social networks. We've never seen anything like it until the last couple of months. The sorts of things we would never publish.
That sounds like Sky News.
But in all seriousness, you know, I mean, you could take the view, as lots of people do, that the left is happier to be vicious and play dirty, perhaps because they're angry about things. And what you do see is very powerful, effective characterizations of right-wing parties in Western democracies as being aloof, as being rich, as being privileged, all the rest of it. And then all of these grotty, nasty, damning little tableaus that leak out, the YouTube videos that are seeded at just the right moment. What you discover when you dig a bit further down is that these aren't spontaneous outpourings. These are very carefully planned leaks by the parties through intermediaries. Now, sometimes that happens through people like Bell Pottinger, and they are getting brilliant at leaking YouTube videos at just the right point in the electoral cycle. Something that they never talk about in public. But for me, you know, what we certainly saw in the American election is that negative campaigning works, right? You know, Romney had massive amounts of damage inflicted on him by the Democrats, and it was all nasty character smears, the kinds of things that make people think, no, actually, I just can't put my X in the box for this guy. He's just too yuck. That's happening really successfully here too, on both sides of the political debate, on both sides of every argument. I think we're going to see an acceleration of that. I think it's going to become very, very nasty, very vicious over the next couple of years, and we're going to start to see candidates kneecapped with these horrendous, little uncovered YouTube videos from their past, blog posts from 2004 they thought they'd forgotten about. This fantastic thing that the internet can do, drag up things from the dim and distant past and then turbocharge their distribution. That's the sort of thing that can create massive swings, and that's actually phenomenally exciting to watch. As irresponsible as it is for, democratically speaking, it's enormously exciting to watch. As a journalist, I'm looking forward greatly to following some of these sort of, grubby phenomena.
Well, that certainly gives us all something to look forward to. And one of Alberto's points that somebody told him that he couldn't see any future in Twitter. I believe that man is now a major architect of the government web platform, isn't he?